Hi guys, I'm Mrs. M. Today we are going to discuss about body cavities in anatomy class. So last week you have learned about different organs inside our body, and you know that all of them are linked with different organ systems. But did you ever had thought that where all these structures are kept? Are they dumped inside our body just like that? Is there enough space by any chance if organs increase their size? So for all these questions, if you have, the answer is our body is just like a gunny bag where all organs are kept inside, but in a protected and organized manner. So here comes our body cavities into the picture. So what are body cavities? These are nothing but spaces inside the body that encloses all the body organs and their associated structures. In a way, they can protect the delicate organs such as brain and heart. At the same time, they will allow the organs to change their shape and size during their functioning process, such as lungs, stomach, and bladder. So how many cavities are there? Broadly, it is divided into two main cavities. The one that is seen on the back side, you call it as dorsal body cavity, and the one that is seen in the front, you call it as ventral body cavity. So ventral body cavity, that is front, and dorsal body cavity, that is back. Okay, now let's see in detail about each cavity. So first is dorsal cavity. Dorsal cavity extended from the head region up to the pelvic region. So it is broadly has two cavities. The one that is at the head region known as cranial cavity, and the one that is thin, long one that is extended from the cranium is known as vertebral canal or spinal canal. So if you go for this cranial cavity, it is enclosing the brain and it is supported by the cranium or skull bones. So if you see this particular spinal cavity or vertebral cavity, it is supported by the vertebrae. The vertebrae that are long series of irregular shaped structured bones that are linearly organized one below the other to form this vertebral column. So vertebral canal is supported by that vertebral column. And then inside this cavity, a thin thread-like structure that extends from the brain, the last part of the brain, up to the this particular pelvic region. You call that thread-like structure as spinal cord. So this vertebral column that has the cavity, vertebral cavity or spinal cavity encloses spinal cord. So do not get confused here. What exactly we have got? Outside we have got the vertebral column. Inside the vertebral column, you have seen that hollow cavity, vertebral cavity or spinal cavity. What does it encloses? It encloses the spinal cord. That's why the name is spinal canal, right? Okay, so now let's see the ventral side. So if you see the ventral side, it has got major organs are being located in this big cavity. It extended from this particular after the neck region up to this particular lower pelvic region. So this big cavity has got the different organs associated with different organ systems. So when you see this area at the thoracic region, so the cavity is known as thoracic cavity. And when you see here, abdomen plus pelvic region, two together are there. So this is known as abdominopelvic cavity. So ventral body cavity is divided into two broadly areas, thoracic cavity and abdominopelvic cavity. So here, if you see, there is a dome-shaped structure. This dome-shaped structured muscle that is separating the thoracic cavity to that of the abdominal cavity is known as diaphragm. So this particular one is known as diaphragm. So what exactly these organs that are located in this ventral cavity are generally called as? They are known as viscera. So let's see the graphic organizer for the body cavity. So as we discussed earlier, body cavities are divided into two mainly. One is dorsal body cavity and one is ventral body cavity. Dorsal body cavity has got cranial cavity and spinal cavity. Spinal cavity is also known as vertebral cavity. Then ventral cavity is divided into upper thoracic cavity and lower abdominopelvic cavity. Then thoracic cavity, if you see, it has again broadly classified into three small areas. Pleural cavities, where lungs are associated. Pericardial cavity, where heart is associated. Mediastinum, where the central portion or space in between the lungs is being located. Now, when you see abdominopelvic cavity, it is again classified into two categories, abdominal cavity and pelvic cavity. So, this is the rough graphic organizer for our body cavities. So, let's see the labeling of this particular image. This will be given for your test quiz. So if this picture is there, on the back side you should label as dorsal body cavity, and at the brain region label as cranial cavity, and as we see this thread-like yellow colored extension is a vertebral cavity that contains the spinal cord. You can see these vertebrae how in the form of series of longitudinal chain-like structures they have organized. Then if you see the on the ventral side, this is the thoracic cavity you can see, but you cannot see the entire whole picture that we will come across in the next picture. And but you can clearly see the diaphragm here that is separating the thoracic cavity to that of the abdominal cavity. So abdominopelvic cavity is these two together. Abdominal cavity at the superior region and pelvic cavity that has a little bit extended posterior, little bit backward it has extended. This is pelvic cavity. So as we see, thoracic cavity mainly contains heart and lungs, and if you see abdominal cavity, the majority of the digestive visceral organs are there, and pelvic cavity generally contains the bladder and reproductive organs and the terminal parts of the digestive system. Okay, so let's go in detail with the thoracic cavity. In this picture, you can see clearly the thoracic cavity's divisions. You have seen two lungs here and one heart is there, and there is a space that is associated in between the lungs. So this particular cavity associated with each lung is known as pleural cavity. How many lungs are there? Two. So therefore, how many pleural cavities we have seen? Two. So why the name this pleural cavity has come into the picture? Since these lungs are lined with a layer known as pleura, therefore the cavity associated with that is known as pleural cavity. Same way, this heart is lined with the pericardium or pericardial layer. Therefore, the cavity associated with the heart is known as pericardial cavity. Truly speaking, the entire space that is between these lungs is known as mediastinum. But since heart is located in between the lungs at the lower area, so you will be seeing the mediastinum only at the superior level. Therefore, we generally call this one as superior mediastinum. But truly speaking, heart is located inside the mediastinum. but heart is protected by pericardial cavity. So heart layer is being covered with pericardial cavity, and lung layer is covered with pleural cavity, and still whatever the space that is still existed is nothing but leftover of the mediastinum. Since it is located at the superior, it is known as superior mediastinum. And here you can see this diaphragm that is separating this thoracic cavity to that of the abdominal cavity. So let's see this one model, and these are the lungs. This is one lung and this is another lung. So if you see this particular cavity, the thoracic cavity, so this is how exactly it has been located and organized. Let me just try. So in this way it has been located. Now can you see exactly the gap that is there, or space that is there in between these two lungs that extended from this area up to this area? This entire area is known as mediastinum. But in between these two lungs, this lower area, this heart is been located. So we can say heart is like this. It has been, I need to organize properly. So even once the heart is located at this lower region, so the upper region is been still, it is space is there, that is superior mediastinum. So what exactly thoracic cavity is involved with functioning? It protects the organs, lungs and heart. And if you see the back side of this lungs, you can say here, this you can see here, this is the esophagus that has extended from this neck region, that's the food pipe, and even trachea also you will be seeing, that is also associated with thoracic cavity. So let me clarify what are these pericardium and pleura by showing in these pictures. So first one is heart. So inside this is the whole area is the heart, and outside the layer is nothing but pericardium. But if you see here, there are two layers that are being seen. The pericardium is divided into two layers. Outer is parietal pericardium and inner is visceral pericardium. And the gap between these two is nothing but pericardial cavity that is filled with fluid so that it protects the heart. Same way, if you see these lungs, each lung is been lined with pleura, but that pleura has got two layers. Outer is parietal pleura and inner is visceral pleura. The gap between those two is nothing but pleural cavity that is filled with pleural fluid. So let's move on to the abdominopelvic cavity. So if you remember, this is the diaphragm that is separating the thoracic cavity to that of the abdominal cavity. So if you see this one below the or inferior to the diaphragm, this entire one is abdominopelvic. The one that is immediately next to the diaphragm is abdominal cavity, and lowermost portion is known as pelvic cavity. So if you see what are the structures that are there in the abdominal cavity. This is stomach, and this is liver, and then small and large intestines. Large intestine is like this, surrounded one, and the central one is small intestine. So the majority of the abdominal region contains the digestive system's parts, we can say. And pelvic region or pelvic cavity contains the reproductive structures and posterior part of the digestive system, so one such as rectum and urinary systems, bladder, etc. are present in this. Now if you see, the pelvic region is also protected by the bony structures known as pelvis, that are the bony structures of the pelvic girdle. And funny thing is, when you see all those cavities, they are all protected by somewhat bony structures. But when it comes to the major digestive systems one, visceral organs that are in the abdominal cavity, there is no bony structures that are supporting. So the most vulnerable organs of the body are situated in this area that are not reinforced by the bone, and the wall is formed by only trunk muscles. So during the accidents, the most vulnerable structures of the body are these particular abdominal structured organs. So okay guys, now we have completed all the major body cavities. So let's move on to the small confined areas where other cavities we can see inside the body. For example, oral cavity where it harbors teeth and tongue. Nasal cavity where it is inside the nose. Orbital cavity where it is located inside the skull, encloses the eyes. Middle ear cavities that encloses the tiny ear ossicles or bones. Then finally the digestive cavity, that is the cavity present inside the digestive canal or food pipe we call it as, that opens to outside by means of anus. So okay guys, I think we have finished every point regarding the body cavities one. So let's summarize. So in the body cavities are there. They are broadly classified into two: dorsal cavity that contains cranial cavity and vertebral cavity that protects the brain and spinal cord, and ventral body cavity, this has got two: thoracic cavity and abdominopelvic cavity. Thoracic cavity contains pleural, pericardial and mediastinum. Abdominopelvic cavity divided into abdominal cavity and pelvic cavity, and that harbors some important digestive system parts and reproductive parts and urinary parts. Okay guys, now it's time for the quick check. Try to fill these blanks with suitable cavities. Okay guys, now it's time for labeling. Make sure that you are labeling the proper body cavity by checking out the word bank given here. And I think you understood by this time about the body cavities. So let's meet in the next video with one more topic. Thank you. Bye-bye.